Welcome. You may be watching this segment video because you're looking for how to find a therapist. And after having 37 years of experience and seeing thousands of individuals and couples, let me make some recommendations to you. First of all, I would say the best kind of referral comes from someone who's already been to that therapist. So if you have a friend or a relative, if you feel so open that you can share a little bit, or just saying, who do you go to for treatment in therapy, they might be able to give you a good recommendation. Next, if you prefer not to talk to a friend or a relative, my suggestion would be to talk with a trusted organization that you know and ask them who they refer to. Because oftentimes, that's the best way to find a good therapist. You can look online or in the phone book, but how do we find a good person just by an advertisement? It's very difficult. So I would try those two sources first. And then when you're in therapy, let me talk about some research that has been done that will help you understand what are the ingredients in a good therapeutic relationship and for positive relationship or positive therapy outcome. The first is you. Your strengths, your resilience, your values. Who are you? And what you bring to the therapy. Many times people feel if they go to a therapist, the therapist is going to fix them. That's never really the case. That's not the kind of therapy that's going to be most helpful for you, to be dependent upon a therapist. But rather, for a therapist to help you with who you are and where you want to go with what you have to work with. And it's very important. So 40% of the positive outcome of therapy is you. Your willingness to put things into therapy, to do the homework, to do the reading, if those things are given. And I recommend that you go to a therapist that does. Because that helps you be a customer for yourself in your own treatment. The second thing, or the next thing, is the therapists themselves. And I don't mean from personality, which can be important, age, gender, and so forth, or length of experience. But does the therapist connect with you? Listen, validate, and do you feel a fit in therapy? Now, this is very important. In fact, research does tell us that 30%, an additional 30% of positive treatment outcome is related to this one factor. So we have what you bring, which is called client factor, the client factor, and then the therapist factor, which is the relationship. And the third thing is, again, focused on you, and that's just your resilience and expectation of hope that you're going to have a positive outcome. So you come into the therapy expecting good things to happen. You join with the therapy with that kind of an attitude, and it's very, very helpful for the outcome. And that's 15% in itself. So if we take a look at this so far, we've got you, the client, the therapist, we have 40%, 30%, and now your expectation, hope, another 15%. Which brings us to the final 15%, which is the therapist theoretical orientation and training. Now, this is surprising to people because they think that that's number one. And it is very important for a therapist to be very skilled and know what they're doing. Don't get me wrong. But it takes all of these things for positive outcome. Now, you should know pretty much within the first couple sessions whether or not you feel it's a good fit and whether or not you're coming in with a good attitude from the standpoint of therapy. Knowing that you're distressed and having difficulty, the hope factor is very important as well. So I would recommend that you keep these in mind in your own therapy treatment. Now let's talk a little bit about what type of person to see. Let's talk about it from a degree standpoint. Now, typically in any state, and every state has different rules and regulations for how they license people, but any state will have psychologists who are either PhDs or what's called a PsyD, Doctor of Psychology. And these folks are highly trained lots of years of classroom and experience, internships that are very long and rigorous, nationalized testing, long processes of getting supervision, and typically they come out very, very prepared to see a number of things, and they have a breadth of different kinds of things they can see and help people with. And then we get into the master's level, and let's be clear at this, that every one of the master's levels can also have doctorates, but they tend not to be licensed or provide for them a psychologist, the same stature as a psychologist. They may be a licensed professional counselor, a marriage and family therapist, or a social worker, and each of them can have doctorates as well. And they can have a breadth of experience as well. But a master's level person is trained in a variety of different things, and they may have great experience and great breadth of knowledge. So I'm not trying to say that one's better than the other. It's just a matter that psychologists are trained in assessments and how to do assessments, and that tends to be a little bit more specialized than the rest. So that typically tends to be in a general way, the types of degrees that you look for to try to find people to help you from the mental health standpoint. Now, we can talk about substance abuse. There's also degrees in that. Substance abuse work and folks that do that, if that's what your need is. There's also domestic violence counselors. And so typically when you go to whatever state you're in, if you'd like to discover what type of people and degrees and expertise they may have, you can go on websites for the state and take a look at just exactly who they license as mental health professionals in the state. But again, every state's different. But one thing that tends to be the same, and that's confidentiality. There is a very important ingredient in mental health work, and that is that we do no harm. That's one of the first ethical principles that we believe in and seek to obey and follow. And so the confidential relationship is between the client and the mental health professional or doctor in my case, which means no information leaves the relationship or the office of which you are talking about your issues. There are some areas in which mental health professionals and others are required to report certain things. And so that confidentiality is breached because of some certain areas. And every therapist that you may try to see or want to see or interview should tell you this, either in writing or in person. But let me share it with you here. The first thing is that confidentiality is waived if you are talking about harming yourself or harming another person. And that therapist has a responsibility, first of all, to talk with you more about that, to understand. We're not talking about fleeting thoughts now. We're talking about plans and real imminency that you may have to harm yourself or another. And just know that your confidentiality will probably be breached by that mental health professional because of the number one principle of ethics, which is to do no harm, not wanting you to do any harm to yourself or someone else. The second is some type of an abuse, and that can either be physical, in some cases emotional, depends on what that is, but sexual abuse of children. And when that happens, there is a duty to report, just like there is if there's an issue with harming yourself or someone else. The therapist has a duty to report, and it's mandated by the state to do so. And the next one is harming an elderly person. In the same way that a child may be abused, the same kind of duty to report goes to harming an elderly person. So those would be the basic areas in all states, to my knowledge, that you need to be aware of as you enter into a counseling relationship.